Hello everyone, and welcome to episode 2 of Earthling Conversations. I am Greta von Kirchmann, your host, and today we have a very special and amazing guest, a friend of mine, and someone that everyone should learn about. His name is Joe Giarratano. So thanks, Joe, for coming on the show again and telling more of your story.
Well, thanks for having me. You've got to introduce Max.
My cat Max is here with us today as well, which is a good thing for bringing on peace, which is what we're trying to do, one of the things we're trying to do here. So I'm just going to start right away asking you, Joe, to tell the audience a little bit about yourself and what you do in the world.
Well, I guess one thing everybody should know is I have been I've been out of prison now a year. In 1979, I was convicted of a double homicide after a 4.5-hour trial, including the lunch break, and was sentenced to death. And spent my first 13 years in prison on death row. I had 5 execution dates, 3 of which were serious. I actually once sat in the electric chair and got up out of it. And the short of it is, in 1991, a governor, after a media campaign and hundreds of thousands of dollars investigation by attorneys and private investigators and police officers, it was determined that I didn't commit the crime. And in 1991, Governor Doug Wilder commuted my sentence, granted me a conditional pardon with the right to a new trial. And the new trial never materialized. Then Attorney General Mary Sue Terry argued in court that evidence of innocence is irrelevant under Virginia procedural law. She was legally correct but morally wrong, as every newspaper in the country noted. But in 1991, I was finally, in 2017, I was finally granted parole after Virginia had abolished parole in 1995. And by fiat, all of us that were in the system were being denied parole. A new governor, new parole chairman came in and granted me parole in 91, and currently waiting for a full pardon. And hopefully that will come within the next 2 years. Since I've been, while in prison, I was involved in a lot of legal activities. On death row, I became basically proficient in the law out of necessity. And what I say by necessity is that there were 38 of us on death row. Originally there were only 7 of us. Death row grew to 38 people, and we didn't have attorneys to represent us. I was one of the lucky few that did have an attorney, a volunteer attorney, a young man out of Charlottesville. But I was forced to represent guys to keep them out of the electric chair. And I had to learn the law to do that. And apparently got pretty good at it. But since being out of prison, I've been working for the Innocence Project at UVA, doing basically what people did for me. Examining cases, investigating cases where individuals may be innocent of the crimes they were convicted for. I was responsible, chiefly responsible in one case, the case of Earl Washington Jr., a mentally retarded black man who had confessed to a murder and a rape. He didn't have an attorney. I took his case all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. We got his death sentence overturned, got his death sentence commuted by the governor, and then subsequently we discovered DNA evidence that completely exonerated him. After 18 years in prison, the governor finally granted him a conditional pardon, let him go. Ultimately, he was fully pardoned and is living in Virginia Beach happily with his wife.
So the work you do now, and the topic that is also all-encompassing here is compassion. And so the work you do now, that really sets the stage beautifully, because through your own deep humanity and compassion, you have done many things helping other people while you needed the help too. People were helping you, you were helping other people while in prison. So today we're going to talk specifically about all of that and how it relates to what you did and what you're doing now. And so my next question is, I'm asking you to tell us a story of an actual experience of an incident that happened to you in prison. If you have a story of a time when you were in prison and you experienced the compassion of another person, and that somehow
Absolutely.
that stuck with you.
Absolutely. My early years in prison, like I said, I was on death row, and I was pretty messed up psychologically. I had been abused as a child. My sister and I were both sexually abused by my stepfather. My mother was physically abusive and mentally abusive. And so I could empathize.
Been through a lot.
I could empathize. Yeah, I could empathize.
I see.
With the people that were on death row with me.
Okay.
But at that particular time, that early on, I was so messed up on drugs, and I was off the illegal drugs by the time I got into prison. Once I was in prison, the illegal drugs stopped. But the prison officials drugged us. They kept us drugged up as a means of psychological control.
Okay.
It was easier to manage us if we were drugged up. So from the time throughout my trial in 1979 up until 1983, I was bombarded with psychotropic medications, Thorazine,
All right.
Mellaril, these types of drugs.
Wow. Okay.
By 1981, I think they had, like 1,600, 1,900 milligrams of Thorazine a day. And so I was pretty much out of it and lost, and my life was going nowhere, and I just wanted to die. I was suicidal. Tried to commit suicide while on death row. That's a no-no. The state doesn't allow you to commit suicide. It's okay for them to kill you, but you can't kill yourself.
I see.
They have to have their ritual. But in that process, a woman named Marie Deans was recruited to come to Virginia to start a prison project, basically, to deal with prison conditions, and ultimately it turned out she had to spend a lot of time with death row prisoners and recruiting attorneys for them. But Marie was unique. I had dropped my appeals and asked to be executed, and my pro bono attorneys brought her in to talk to me. They thought that she could bring a unique perspective to it. Her mother had been murdered
Okay.
by an escaped convict in another state years before, when she was pregnant with her first son. And she came home, the police were at her home, and the ambulance was there, and the police came out. They wouldn't let her in the house, and she was like, what's wrong, what's happened? And the police just told her, said, don't worry about it, we're going to find the bastard that did this, and we're going to kill him. And Marie was like, how's that going to bring my mother back?
I see.
And so
So her stance on
capital punishment.
On capital punishment, I see, and the general notion of revenge or eye for an eye, she rather immediately
she grasped it. It was like
grasped that was not
the pain that she was in. Why would she want to visit that on somebody else? And how was killing somebody else going to, ease her pain?
So that was a moment of
Revelation. For her.
revelation and of compassion for just the general state of
Humanity.
humans in general.
And
Yeah.
and that compelled her to found an organization, and to this day one of the largest victims' rights organizations in the country, called Murder Victims' Families for Reconciliation. And
Amazing.
it was brought about because prosecutors will use victims to help them secure a death sentence. It's not about
I see.
It's not about the victims themselves. It's more they use it as a political tool to get death sentences. And
I see.
Even
Okay.
if the family member doesn't want to seek the death sentence, the prosecutor will try to guilt trip them. You didn't love your family. You didn't. You didn't love the loved one. If you love them, you want this person dead. That sort of thing. And Marie was reacting to that. And she found that many people who had people murdered in their families felt the same way. There wasn't any group for them. There wasn't any support group for them.
Okay.
And then at some point, she expanded it even further and brought in the families of people who had been executed. She considered them murder victims as well, murder victims' family members. But I had dropped my appeals and was in the death house at the old state penitentiary in Richmond, pretty much out of it. And my attorneys had brought Marie in to talk to me, to find out, and to get me to pick up my appeals. And the only reason she got my attention, I couldn't understand how someone whose mother had been murdered could come into a prison and talk to somebody who had been convicted of murder.
Okay.
And care.
So meeting her was a moment where you wanted to understand how she could be in this compassionate
and it was
state.
a watershed moment for me.
All right. Well, we're gonna end our first segment, and please join us for the next segment of the same interview.